The ambulance screamed through Dubai's pre-dawn streets at 3:42 a.m. on September 19, 2019, its siren cutting through the silence of sleeping luxury towers. Inside, paramedics worked frantically over the seizing body of a young woman whose vital signs were collapsing faster than they could stabilize them. Her lips had turned blue. Her pupils were pinpoints. White foam bubbled from her mouth as convulsions racked her frame with violent, irregular spasms. How much did she ingest? The lead paramedic shouted over the siren's wail. The caller who had summoned them, a sobbing Filipina housekeeper named Grace Reyes, could only shake her head helplessly. I don't know, I found her like this. She was fine at dinner. We ate the same food. But after she had tea with Madam Sheikha, she started vomiting. Then the seizures, please, you have to save her. By the time they reached Rashid Hospital's emergency department, the patient's heart had stopped twice. Doctors worked for 47 minutes, pumping her chest, shocking her heart, flooding her system with antidotes for toxins they could only guess at. But some poisons work too efficiently, too completely, for modern medicine to reverse. At 4:29 a.m., Dr. Hassan Al-Mansouri pronounced 26-year-old Jasmine Cruz dead. Cause of death, undetermined pending toxicology. But in his 20 years as an ER physician, he had seen enough poisonings to recognize the signs. The distinctive smell of bitter almonds that clung to her breath. The cherry-red discoloration of her blood. The rapid, catastrophic organ failure that no natural illness could explain. This wasn't an accident. This was murder, calculated and deliberate. And the victim's last words, gasped to grace between convulsions, would unravel a story of obsession, betrayal, and the kind of jealous rage that transforms love into something murderous. "Tell my baby I'm sorry," Jasmine had whispered, her hand pressing against her barely swollen belly. "Tell Carlos, tell him she killed us both." The investigation that followed would expose the darkest corners of Dubai's glittering elite, where unlimited wealth purchased not just luxury but impunity, where foreign workers' lives held value only as long as they remained invisible and compliant, and where a woman's desperation to protect her marriage would lead her to commit an act so heinous that even seasoned investigators would struggle to comprehend its cruelty. This is the story of two women trapped in different cages, both built by the same man. One cage was made of gold and marble. The other was constructed from debt and desperation. And when those cages collided, the resulting explosion would leave one woman dead, another facing justice, and a powerful man finally forced to confront the consequences of treating human beings as property. But this story doesn't begin with poison or death. It begins 18 months earlier, in the departure lounge of Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila, where a young woman named Jasmine Cruz was about to board a flight that would change everything. Manila's airport on March 3, 2018 was chaos incarnate. Thousands of overseas Filipino workers crowded the terminal, each carrying the weight of their families' hopes in cheap luggage and carefully folded documents. Jasmine Cruz sat among them, her hands clutching a folder containing her employment contract, medical clearance, and visa authorization for the United Arab Emirates. At 24, Jasmine possessed the kind of delicate beauty that made people look twice. High cheekbones inherited from her Ilocano mother. Large, expressive eyes that reflected her emotions with dangerous honesty. Long black hair that fell to her waist, her one vanity in a life that had offered few opportunities for self-indulgence. She was small, barely 5 feet 2 inches, with the slim build of someone who had grown up never quite getting enough to eat. Born on June 12, 1994 in Layag City, Ilocos Norte, Jasmine was the middle child in a family of 7. Her father, Eduardo, had worked as a tricycle driver until diabetes took his right leg, leaving him unable to work and dependent on medications the family could barely afford. Her mother, Alina, sold vegetables in the public market, waking at 3:00 a.m. daily to secure the best produce, standing in the heat until evening for profits that rarely exceeded 500 pesos per day. Jasmine had been a brilliant student, the kind teachers remembered decades later. She had dreamed of becoming a teacher herself, of standing in front of a classroom and opening young minds to possibilities beyond their circumstances. She had even secured a scholarship to Mariano Marcos State University, a miracle that had made her family weep with joy and pride. But during her second year, her father's medical emergency had consumed what little savings they possessed. The choice was brutal and simple: continue her education while her family starved, or sacrifice her dreams so her younger siblings could eat. Jasmine withdrew from university without hesitation, taking work at a garment factory where she sewed shirts for export markets, earning 350 pesos for 12-hour days in windowless rooms that reached 40 degrees Celsius. For 2 years, she endured. 2 years of monotonous labor, of fingers cramping around needles, of breathing air thick with fabric dust, of watching her dreams recede like the tide going out. Then a recruiter from a Manila-based agency visited the factory, promising overseas employment with salaries that seemed impossible. Domestic helper positions in Dubai, 1,500 dirhams monthly, approximately 20,000 pesos, more than she could earn in 3 months at the factory. The recruitment fees were crushing: 120,000 pesos for processing, medical examinations, travel documents, and the mysterious administrative costs that always accompanied these arrangements. Jasmine's family borrowed from 3 different sources: a formal remittance company at 15% monthly interest, a neighborhood loan shark at 20%, and a cousin in Saudi Arabia who sent money with the understanding that Jasmine would pay it back with her first year's salary. The contract she signed promised employment as a nanny for a respectable Emirati family. 2 children, ages 6 and 8, reasonable hours, 1 day off weekly. The standard promises that recruiters made and sponsors rarely honored. As Jasmine's flight lifted off from Manila, banking over Manila Bay where sunset painted the polluted water in shades of orange and gold, she pressed her face against the window and whispered a prayer to Saint Jude, patron saint of lost causes. She had no way of knowing that she would need divine intervention far more desperately than she could possibly imagine. Dubai International Airport assaulted Jasmine's senses with its overwhelming scale and impossible cleanliness. Everything gleamed: marble floors polished to mirror brightness, chrome fixtures that reflected fluorescent light in blinding patterns, duty-free shops selling luxuries she couldn't even name. The air conditioning was so aggressive it raised goosebumps on her arms despite the layers she wore. She was met in the arrivals hall by a driver holding a placard with her name misspelled: Jasmine Cruz. He was Pakistani, middle-aged, his face professionally expressionless as he collected her single suitcase and led her to a waiting Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than her family's house. The drive from the airport to her employer's residence took 40 minutes through a city that seemed designed by architects who had confused ambition with madness. Buildings rose like glass mountains, highways stacked in impossible layers. Construction cranes dotted the horizon like a mechanical forest. Digital billboards advertised watches worth 6 figures, cars that could reach 200 miles per hour, apartments that began at $2 million. Her destination was a villa in Emirates Hills, Dubai's most exclusive gated community where properties started at $5 million and climbed into ranges that made the numbers meaningless. The driver spoke to security guards in Arabic. Gates swung open automatically, and they entered a world of manicured lawns kept impossibly green despite the desert heat, of houses that looked like small palaces, of silence so profound it felt aggressive after Manila's constant noise. The Al-Rashid family compound sprawled across 2 acres. The main house was modern Arabic architecture, clean white lines punctuated by traditional wooden screens, a fountain in the circular driveway, date palms imported fully grown to provide instant shade. The driver led Jasmine not to the main entrance, but around to a side building partially hidden by landscaping. The servants' quarters housed 6 people, 2 Filipina maids, an Indian cook, a Sri Lankan gardener, the Pakistani driver who had collected her, and a Bangladeshi general laborer. Each had a small room with a narrow bed, a plastic wardrobe, and a shared bathroom that serviced all 6 staff members. The air conditioning was minimal, keeping the temperature barely tolerable rather than comfortable. Jasmine's introduction to her employers came that evening. Sheikh Rashid bin Mohammed Al-Rashid was 42, though his beard, carefully dyed black, and his expensive grooming made him appear younger. He had inherited his wealth rather than earned it, the beneficiary of a grandfather who had secured oil rights in the 1960s and a father who had diversified into real estate and finance. His personal fortune was estimated at $3.2 billion, though exact figures were impossible to verify given the opacity of Gulf family wealth. He barely glanced at Jasmine during the introduction, his attention focused on his phone as the household manager. A severe Egyptian woman named Layla explained Jasmine's duties. Care for the children, Aisha and Mohammed. Prepare their meals, ensure they complete homework, coordinate their activities, attend to their needs. Hours would be 6:00 a.m. to 9:00 p.m. daily. Day off would be every other Friday, not weekly as promised. Sheikha Noor, Rashid's wife, was present but silent during this orientation. At 38, she retained the striking beauty that had made her a sought-after match among Gulf families 18 years earlier when their marriage was arranged. Educated at the American University of Beirut, she spoke 5 languages and held a master's degree in international relations that she had never used professionally. Her role was ornamental and reproductive, to maintain the household, raise children who reflected well on the family, and present the image of traditional piety combined with modern sophistication. She watched Jasmine with an expression that the younger woman couldn't quite read, not hostile but not welcoming either, calculating perhaps, assessing this new variable in her household's equation. The children were typical products of unlimited privilege, spoiled, demanding, unfamiliar with the word no. 8-year-old Mohammed had the imperious manner of a boy who had learned that tantrums produced results. 6-year-old Aisha was quieter but equally entitled, crying when displeased and expecting immediate gratification. Jasmine's first 3 months were brutal. The promised 1,500 dirhams monthly became 1,200 after deductions for accommodation and meals, though she ate only staff leftovers and slept in a room that cost nothing to provide. Her hours stretched far beyond the stated schedule as the family made spontaneous demands. Prepare a late-night snack, clean up after impromptu gatherings, watch the children while parents attended social events that lasted until dawn. The loan payments consumed her entire salary and more. The formal remittance company required 8,000 pesos monthly. The loan shark demanded 6,000 pesos plus interest that had ballooned the principal to 150,000 pesos. Her family needed at least 5,000 pesos for basic expenses, her father's medications, her siblings' school fees. Jasmine was drowning financially, working 7-day weeks to fall further behind every month. It was during this period of grinding desperation that Sheikh Rashid began to notice her. The attention started subtly, as these things always do. Rashid began appearing in spaces where he normally wouldn't: the kitchen during breakfast preparation, the children's playroom during homework time, the garden where Jasmine would take Aisha and Mohammed for afternoon fresh air. His presence was always plausibly explained: checking on something, looking for someone, passing through on his way elsewhere. But his gaze lingered on Jasmine in ways that made her skin crawl. "You're doing excellent work with the children," he said one afternoon in late June, appearing in the playroom where Jasmine was helping Mohammed with Arabic reading. His voice was smooth, educated, accented with the British inflection that elite Gulf Arabs acquired from UK boarding schools. "Thank you, sir," Jasmine replied, her eyes downcast respectfully, her posture rigid with discomfort. "Mohammed's reading has improved significantly. His tutor mentioned it." Rashid moved closer, ostensibly to examine his son's workbook, his arm brushing against Jasmine's shoulder. "You have a gift for working with children. It's a valuable quality." The compliments continued, always delivered when no one else was present, always accompanied by small physical contacts that Jasmine couldn't protest without seeming presumptuous or ungrateful. A hand on her shoulder when praising her work, fingers touching hers when passing items, standing unnecessarily close during conversations. By July, the gifts began, a bottle of perfume presented casually after Rashid returned from a business trip to Paris. "I bought this for the female staff," he said, though Jasmine later learned she was the only one who received anything. A silk scarf wrapped in tissue paper and left on her bed with a note: "This color will look beautiful on you. R." Jasmine knew exactly what was happening. She had heard the stories from other domestic workers, the warnings whispered during Sunday Mass at the Catholic Church in Jebel Ali. Wealthy Arab employers who viewed foreign staff as possessions available for any use. Women who resisted were fired, deported with no recourse, often after trumped-up accusations of theft to ensure they left in disgrace. Her options were impossibly limited. Accept Rashid's advances and hope his interest would be brief, maybe earn enough favor to improve her financial situation. Or resist and risk deportation, leaving her family's debts unpaid and her siblings' educations abandoned. The choice was made for her on August 12, 2018, when Rashid summoned her to his private study after the household had retired for the night. The study was masculine opulence. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, walls lined with books that Rashid had probably never read, but that signaled cultural sophistication. He sat behind a desk that could have served as a dining table, a crystal glass of whiskey catching the lamplight. "Close the door," he instructed when Jasmine entered, her heart hammering with fear she tried desperately to hide. She complied, remaining by the door, maintaining maximum distance. "I've been reviewing your visa documents," Rashid began, his tone businesslike. "There are some irregularities. The recruitment agency appears to have made errors in your initial paperwork. This could be problematic if immigration authorities conduct an audit." The threat was subtle but crystal clear. Her legal status in the UAE was entirely dependent on his sponsorship. With a single phone call, he could revoke her visa, report violations real or fabricated, and have her deported within days. "Sir, I don't understand," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her terror. "I provided all required documents. The agency handled everything properly." "I'm sure they did," Rashid replied smoothly. "But these things can be complicated. Errors happen. Fortunately, I have connections in the immigration department. I can ensure any problems are resolved quietly without complications." He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. But such assistance requires cooperation, understanding, a recognition that we're all dependent on each other in complex ways. He was close now, too close, his hand reaching to touch her face. Jasmine flinched but didn't retreat, knowing that resistance would make everything worse. "You're very beautiful, Jasmine," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey and entitlement. "And beauty should be appreciated, rewarded. I can make your life here very comfortable. Better salary, easier hours, help with your family's debts. All I ask is that you be available when I need companionship." The proposition was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never been refused, who viewed consent as a luxury poor people couldn't afford. Jasmine's mind raced through impossible calculations. If she refused, she'd be sent home in disgrace, her debts unpaid and now increased by the recruitment fees her family would still owe. Her siblings would leave school. Her father would go without medication. Her family's poverty would deepen into catastrophe. If she accepted, she would become Rashid's mistress, available whenever he desired, living a double life of respectable nanny by day and sexual property by night. But she would survive. Her family would survive. And maybe, eventually, she could save enough to escape. "What about Sheikha Noor?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rashid laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My wife has her life, I have mine. She understands how these arrangements work. She won't interfere as long as you're discreet." This was a lie, though Jasmine had no way of knowing it. Sheikha Noor understood nothing of her husband's current plans. But she would soon learn everything, and her response would be far more dangerous than anything Rashid imagined. That night in Rashid's study, Jasmine Cruz surrendered not just her body, but the last fragments of agency over her own life. The Sheikh was not gentle. He took what he wanted with the mechanical efficiency of someone for whom sex was about power rather than pleasure, about proving ownership rather than sharing intimacy. When it was over, Rashid handed Jasmine an envelope containing 5,000 dirhams in cash. "For your family," he said, already turning his attention back to emails on his laptop. There will be more regularly as long as you remain available and discreet. Jasmine returned to her tiny room, showered until the water ran cold, and cried silently into her pillow so the other staff wouldn't hear. She sent 3,000 dirhams to her mother the next morning, using the remaining 2,000 to pay down her loan shark debt. The money transfer made her feel slightly less dirty, as if her degradation had purchased something tangible rather than being merely worthless suffering. The affair, if something so transactional and non-consensual could be called an affair, settled into a rhythm over the following months. 2 or 3 times weekly, Rashid would summon Jasmine to his study, his bedroom when Sheikha Noor was traveling, or occasionally to a luxury apartment he maintained in Dubai Marina for exactly these purposes. Each encounter followed the same pattern: mechanical sex, cash payment, immediate dismissal. Jasmine became expert at compartmentalization. During the day, she was the devoted nanny, playing with Aisha and Mohammed, helping with homework, preparing healthy meals, maintaining the fiction of her proper role. At night, she became whoever Rashid wanted her to be, performing enthusiasm she didn't feel, simulating pleasure that was entirely false. The money was life-changing for her family. Within 4 months, she had paid off both the formal loan and the loan shark debt. Her father received better medical care, his blood sugar finally controlled through medications they could now afford. Her younger sister returned to school after a year's absence. Her mother stopped working 7 days weekly, reduced to 5 days, her hands beginning to heal from years of hard labor. Every peso sent home came from Jasmine's flesh, her dignity, her soul. But she convinced herself the transaction was worth it, that her suffering purchased her family's survival, that this was the choice millions of women made throughout history when circumstances left them without better options. She had no idea that 2 lives were growing inside her. The baby she would discover in May 2019, and the seed of Sheikha Noor's murderous rage that was germinating with every clandestine meeting between husband and mistress. Sheikha Noor bint Ahmed Al Maktoum was not naive. In 18 years of marriage to Rashid, she had endured 7 confirmed affairs that she knew about and probably dozens more she didn't. The pattern was consistent. Her husband would develop an obsession with someone new, conduct a brief intense liaison, then move on once the novelty faded. These women were always temporary, disposable, no threat to Noor's position as wife and mother of his children. But Jasmine was different, and Noor recognized this with growing alarm through the fall and winter of 2018-2019. Previous affairs had been conducted away from home, carefully compartmentalized from family life. But Rashid had brought Jasmine into their household, into daily contact with their children, creating intimacy that transcended sex. Noor watched her husband's face during breakfast when Jasmine served the children, noting a softness in his expression that he never showed toward his wife. Worse, the money transfers were significant and regular. Noor monitored all family accounts, a necessary precaution with a husband whose spending could be reckless. She saw the cash withdrawals, 5,000 dirhams every week like clockwork. She saw the records of international transfers to the Philippines. Rashid had given his mistresses gifts before, but never ongoing financial support, suggesting obligation rather than whim. The breaking point came in early May 2019, when Noor was reviewing household security footage for an unrelated reason, and discovered recordings of Rashid entering Jasmine's room in the servants' quarters multiple times. The camera angles didn't show what happened inside, but the duration of the visits and Rashid's disheveled appearance upon exit told the story clearly enough. Noor's initial response was not anger but calculation. She had not survived 18 years in a marriage built on political and economic alliance by being emotional or impulsive. Her position was secured by children, by family connections, by the impossibility of Rashid divorcing her without massive financial and social consequences. But that security required maintaining certain boundaries, and Rashid was crossing them. She hired a private investigator, a British expat named David Morrison, who specialized in discreet inquiries for Dubai's wealthy elite. His report, delivered 2 weeks later, confirmed Noor's worst suspicions while adding details that transformed concern into something much darker. Jasmine Cruz, age 24, domestic worker, had been engaged in a sexual relationship with Rashid for approximately 9 months. Financial transfers totaling 180,000 dirhams had been sent to her family in the Philippines. More significantly, Jasmine had recently visited a medical clinic in Dera, paying cash for prenatal vitamins and an ultrasound that confirmed early pregnancy. Noor sat in her private sitting room, Morrison's report spread across her lap, staring at the ultrasound image that the investigator had somehow obtained. The grainy photograph showed a tiny form, barely recognizable as human, floating in amniotic fluid. 7 weeks gestational age, according to the medical notes. This changed everything. Mistresses were tolerable, even expected in the rarefied world of Gulf elite families. But pregnancy suggested permanence, obligation, the possibility of a child who could make claims on Rashid's estate and attention. Worse, it suggested emotional connection, that Rashid might actually care about this woman beyond her use as a sexual convenience. Noor's options crystallized with terrible clarity. She could confront Rashid, demand he end the affair and fire the girl. But this would likely push him to install Jasmine in an apartment, to continue supporting her, perhaps even to acknowledge the child if it was born. Rashid had always wanted another son. Mohammed was sickly, disappointing. A healthy baby boy might appeal to him in ways that made the situation permanent. Or Noor could solve the problem herself, eliminating the threat before it grew into something that could actually damage her marriage and position. The decision was easier than it should have been. Noor had not built her life, had not endured 18 years of a loveless marriage maintained for duty and children, only to be displaced by a domestic worker young enough to be her daughter. The solution would need to be permanent, untraceable, and swift. Thallium sulfate is a colorless, odorless, tasteless powder that was once commonly used as rat poison before being banned in most countries due to its toxicity. Noor obtained it through a contact in the Moroccan expatriate community, where traditional medicine and less-than-legal substances circulated freely among those who knew where to ask. The compound is particularly insidious because symptoms can take hours or even days to manifest, and when they do appear, they often mimic food poisoning or stomach flu until it's too late for effective treatment. A dose of just 1 gram can be fatal, and there's no quick field test that can detect it in food or drink. Noor spent 3 weeks planning, observing patterns, waiting for the perfect opportunity. She needed an occasion when Jasmine would ingest something that only she consumed, that wouldn't contaminate food shared with the children or other staff, and where Noor could plausibly have access to prepare what would be poisoned. The opportunity came on September 18, 2019. Rashid was traveling to Abu Dhabi for meetings with government officials, scheduled to be gone overnight. The children had a playdate at a friend's villa, leaving Jasmine with rare free time in the afternoon. And Sheikha Noor, according to the household schedule, was hosting a ladies' charity committee meeting in the main house. At 4:30 p.m., Noor personally carried a tray to the servants' quarters. On it was a delicate Chinese teapot, a matching cup and saucer, and a small plate of expensive pastries from a boutique bakery. "Jasmine," Noor called through the door, her voice warm with manufactured kindness. "May I speak with you?" Jasmine opened her door, surprised and immediately anxious. In 9 months of working in the household, Sheikha Noor had barely spoken to her beyond giving instructions about the children. A personal visit was unprecedented and ominous. "Please sit," Noor gestured to the narrow bed, the room's only seating. "I've brought tea. I thought we should talk woman to woman." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Noor spoke about the challenges of marriage, about loneliness, about the complicated accommodations that women must make in worlds governed by male desires and family obligations. She seemed sympathetic, even kind, acknowledging the difficult position Jasmine occupied. "I know about you and my husband," Noor said gently, pouring tea from the pot she had prepared personally. "I'm not angry. These things happen in households like ours. Men have needs that wives cannot always fulfill, especially after many years of marriage." Jasmine's fear was palpable, but Noor waved it away with practiced reassurance. You don't need to be afraid. I'm not going to fire you or report you. I understand that you were given little choice in the matter. My husband can be very persuasive, especially with young women who depend on his sponsorship for their visa status. The tea was jasmine-scented, an irony that Noor found privately amusing. She watched as the younger woman took a tentative sip, then another, relaxing slightly under Noor's apparent acceptance of the situation. I wanted to discuss an arrangement, Noor continued, her voice reasonable and calm. I know you've been sending money to your family, which suggests my husband has been compensating you for your additional duties. I think we can formalize this more clearly. I'm prepared to offer you a direct payment of 50,000 dirhams if you agree to leave Dubai voluntarily. Return to the Philippines, tell your family you've completed your contract, and use the money to start fresh. Jasmine's hand went instinctively to her stomach, a gesture so small and unconscious that she probably didn't realize she made it. But Noor saw, and her eyes hardened behind her mask of sympathy. Is there something you need to tell me? Noor asked, her voice still gentle but with an edge that hadn't been there before. I'm pregnant, Jasmine whispered, the secret she had been holding for 6 weeks finally spoken aloud to the one person who should never have known. 8 weeks. I haven't told Sheikh Rashid yet. I was waiting for the right time. Noor's expression didn't change, her composure absolute. I see, and what do you plan to do? I don't know, Jasmine admitted, tears beginning to form. I never intended this to happen. I was careful, but obviously not careful enough. I can't have a baby here unmarried working as a domestic helper. It would be scandal for your family, for me. Indeed, Noor agreed, pouring more tea into Jasmine's cup. Which is why my offer is even more generous than you realize. 50,000 dirhams is enough to return home and raise a child, at least for the first few years. My husband need never know. You can tell your family that the father is a boyfriend in Dubai who couldn't marry you. These things happen. People understand. The poison in the teapot was sufficient to kill 3 adult humans. Noor had been generous with the dosage, wanting certainty rather than risk. The thallium sulfate had dissolved completely in the hot water, undetectable by taste or smell, masked by the strong jasmine flavor of the tea. Jasmine drank deeply, her emotional turmoil making her thirsty, accepting Noor's offer of pastries and eating too while they continued discussing the logistics of her departure. By the time Noor left, taking the tea service with her to wash personally, Jasmine had consumed enough thallium to kill her 3 times over. The symptoms began at 7:30 p.m. with nausea that Jasmine initially attributed to pregnancy-related morning sickness, though the intensity was unprecedented. By 8:00 p.m., she was vomiting violently, her body trying desperately to expel the toxin that was already being absorbed into her bloodstream, binding to her cells, disrupting the fundamental processes that kept her alive. Grace Reyes, the senior Filipina maid, found Jasmine at 9:15 p.m., collapsed on the bathroom floor in a pool of vomit, her body convulsing, white foam bubbling from her mouth. Grace screamed for help, calling emergency services while trying to stabilize her friend, having no idea what was causing the sudden catastrophic illness. The other staff gathered, panicked and helpless. Someone suggested food poisoning, but they had all eaten the same dinner and no one else was sick. Someone else mentioned the tea that Sheikha Noor had personally delivered, but the tea service was gone, washed and put away, no evidence remaining. By the time the ambulance arrived at 9:47 p.m., Jasmine was barely conscious, her pupils dilated, her heart rate erratic, her blood pressure dangerously low. The paramedics did what they could, but they were treating symptoms without knowing the cause, fighting an invisible enemy that had already won. Jasmine died at 4:29 a.m. on September 19, 2019, in the intensive care unit of Rashid Hospital. Her last words, spoken to Grace during a brief moment of lucidity in the ambulance, were, "Tell my baby I'm sorry. Tell Carlos, tell him she killed us both." Grace didn't know who Carlos was. Jasmine had no boyfriend or husband in Dubai. The name meant nothing to the paramedics or the hospital staff. But the accusation in "she killed us both" was clear enough to prompt Dr. Al-Mansouri to immediately order a comprehensive toxicology screen and notify Dubai police that he suspected foul play. The investigation into Jasmine Cruz's death began within hours and immediately encountered the obstacles that always arise when wealthy, powerful families are involved in criminal matters. Detective Karim Hassan, a 15-year veteran of Dubai Police's Criminal Investigation Department, was assigned as lead investigator. He was Emirati, educated in the UK, and experienced enough to recognize that this case would be politically sensitive from the moment he saw the address: Emirates Hills, Al-Rashid family compound. The toxicology results came back 48 hours later. Massive thallium poisoning, levels that were unambiguously fatal and suggested deliberate administration rather than environmental exposure. The medical examiner confirmed that Jasmine had been approximately 8 weeks pregnant at time of death, making this technically a double homicide. Hassan's preliminary interviews with household staff revealed the affair between Rashid and Jasmine, though everyone was careful to frame it in ways that minimized the Sheikh's culpability and emphasized Jasmine's supposed seduction. The culture of protecting employers ran deep among domestic workers who knew their own visa status depended on maintaining good relationships. But Grace Reyes, devastated by her friend's death and emboldened by fury, broke ranks. In a recorded interview at the police station, she described Sheikha Noor's unprecedented visit to Jasmine on the day she fell ill, the tea service that had been personally delivered, Jasmine's immediate illness after consuming it. "Madam never brings tea to staff," Grace said, her voice shaking but determined. "Never in the 4 years I've worked there, but that day she came personally, insisted Jasmine drink, stayed to make sure she finished the pot. Then 2 hours later, Jasmine is dying. You tell me that's coincidence?" The forensic team searched the Al-Rashid compound, but the tea service had been thoroughly washed. Traces of thallium were found in the kitchen drain trap, consistent with the pot and cups being rinsed there, but not enough to prove conclusively what had been in the tea versus environmental contamination. More damning was the discovery, during a search of Sheikha Noor's private quarters, of a small envelope containing residual thallium sulfate powder hidden in her jewelry safe. Noor claimed ignorance, suggesting it must have been planted, but the location and her exclusive access to that safe made this defense implausible. The interrogation of Sheikha Noor lasted 6 hours over 2 days. She was composed, dignified, represented by a team of lawyers that included 2 former prosecutors and a UK barrister specializing in international criminal law. Her strategy was denial combined with victim blaming. She knew nothing about any poison, had brought tea to Jasmine as a gesture of feminine solidarity, had no motive to harm a domestic worker she barely noticed. But Hassan had been investigating crimes in Dubai long enough to recognize guilt beneath polished denials. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Motive, opportunity, the poison found in her possession, and Grace's testimony about the tea delivery. The case went to prosecution in November 2019, generating international media attention that the UAE government would have preferred to avoid. Dubai billionaire's wife murders pregnant mistress made headlines globally, exposing the dark underbelly of luxury and exploitation that the city worked hard to conceal beneath its carefully curated image of modern sophistication. The trial began in January 2020 and lasted 3 months, a legal spectacle that revealed the complex dynamics of power, gender, and justice in a society where traditional values collided constantly with modern reality. Sheikha Noor's defense argued that she was the real victim, a dutiful wife betrayed by a husband who conducted affairs with household staff, subjected to public humiliation, driven to desperation but not to murder. They presented her as a sympathetic figure, a woman who had endured years of infidelity with grace and dignity, who was being scapegoated for a tragedy she didn't cause. The prosecution countered with forensic evidence, testimony from Grace and other household staff, and the damning discovery of thallium in Noor's possession. Most compellingly, they presented Jasmine's dying words as a deathbed declaration, admissible under UAE evidence law, directly accusing Noor of murder. Expert witnesses testified about thallium poisoning, explaining how rare the substance was, how difficult to obtain, how its use indicated premeditation and planning rather than impulse. The medical examiner described Jasmine's suffering in clinical detail. The seizures, the organ failure, the hours of agony as the poison destroyed her body cell by cell. Rashid bin Mohammed Al-Rashid testified reluctantly, forced to admit under oath to the affair while minimizing his culpability. He portrayed Jasmine as a willing participant, omitting the coercive circumstances and economic desperation that had made her consent meaningless. His testimony was designed to protect himself while implicitly supporting his wife's defense, suggesting Jasmine had been trouble, a seductress who had disrupted his household. The verdict came on March 27, 2020, guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree, with the additional special circumstance of killing a pregnant woman. Under UAE law, capital punishment was possible, but given Noor's status and family connections, the sentence was life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 25 years. The courtroom erupted in chaos, Noor's family shouting protests, Rashid sitting in stunned silence as the reality of his wife's conviction settled over him. The international media covering the trial transmitted images globally. A wealthy woman in designer abaya and hijab being led away in handcuffs, tangible proof that even in Dubai's hierarchical society, some crimes couldn't be completely shielded by money and power. But for Jasmine Cruz's family in Layag City, the verdict brought cold comfort. Their daughter was dead, along with the grandchild they would never meet. The money Jasmine had sent home, earned through such degrading means, now felt tainted, blood money literally purchased with her life. Elena Cruz, Jasmine's mother, gave a statement through the Philippine consulate that captured the tragedy's essence. "My daughter went to Dubai to help our family, to give her siblings opportunities she never had. She was a good girl, religious, respectful. That man destroyed her piece by piece, and that woman finished what he started. All the money in the world can't bring back my child. I hope they both never know peace." The aftermath rippled outward in ways that transcended the immediate tragedy. International labor organizations used Jasmine's case to highlight the vulnerability of domestic workers in Gulf countries, pushing for stronger protections and oversight. The Philippine government temporarily suspended deployment of domestic workers to the UAE, lifting the ban only after negotiations produced enhanced security measures and legal protections. Within the Filipino community in Dubai, Jasmine became a martyr figure, her story told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of working in private households, about the impossibility of consent when power imbalances are so extreme, about how beauty can become curse rather than blessing when you're poor in a country that treats poverty as crime. Rashid bin Mohammed Al-Rashid faced no criminal charges, though civil lawsuits filed by Jasmine's family sought damages for wrongful death and sexual exploitation. These cases were quietly settled out of court for undisclosed amounts, though rumors suggested the payments totaled over $2 million, money that would transform the Cruz family's circumstances, even as it reminded them daily of how their daughter purchased their prosperity. The Al-Rashid children, Aisha and Mohammed, were told that their nanny had died of sudden illness, and their mother had traveled abroad for extended family business. They were too young to understand the full truth, too sheltered to comprehend how privilege and exploitation intersected in their household. Perhaps someday they would learn what really happened, would understand the human cost of their family's wealth and status. Sheikha Noor bint Ahmed Al Maktoum currently resides in Al Awir prison on the outskirts of Dubai, serving her life sentence in a facility that, while still a prison, offers accommodations far superior to what most inmates experience globally. Her family visits monthly, her children less frequently as they've grown older and absorbed the shame of her conviction. She maintains her innocence in interviews with journalists, claiming she was convicted on circumstantial evidence and the biased testimony of domestic workers with axes to grind. The penthouse apartment in Dubai Marina, where Rashid conducted his affairs, was quietly sold, the proceeds donated to a Filipino workers' charity in a gesture of anonymous guilt. The servants' quarters at the Emirates Hills compound were renovated and improved, suddenly offering the privacy and comfort that had been denied when it might have protected Jasmine from exploitation. But these improvements came too late for the young woman whose death catalyzed them, too late for the baby who never had the chance to draw breath, too late to redeem a system built on structural inequality and casual cruelty. Jasmine Cruz's grave in Layag City is marked by a simple headstone that reads, "Beloved daughter, sister, gone too soon, 1994-2019. Her family chose not to mention the pregnancy, protecting her reputation in their conservative community. But those who know the full story understand that 2 lives are buried there, 2 futures extinguished by jealousy and poison, and the toxic intersection of wealth and desperation. The questions raised by this tragedy resist easy answers. Was Sheikha Noor a murderess or a woman driven to extremes by years of humiliation? Was Jasmine a victim or a willing participant in an affair that benefited her economically? Was Rashid a predator or simply a wealthy man acting according to the privileges his society granted him? Perhaps all these things are simultaneously true, each person operating within systems of power and constraint that made tragedy, if not inevitable, then at least predictable. Perhaps in a world where human beings are reduced to economic calculations, where beauty becomes commodity and consent becomes negotiable, this kind of violence is the natural consequence of structural injustice. What remains undeniable is that 3 lives were destroyed. Jasmine's, her unborn child, and in a different way, Sheikha Noor, each a casualty of circumstances that should never have existed, choices that should never have been necessary, a system that valued property more than people and power more than justice. If you've stayed with this story to its bitter end, thank you for bearing witness to Jasmine Cruz's life and death. Subscribe to this channel if you believe true crime should illuminate injustice rather than simply sensationalize tragedy. Share this story with someone who needs to understand the real costs of migrant labor exploitation. And remember, behind every statistic about overseas workers are human beings making impossible choices in impossible situations. When does desperation make consent meaningless? When does betrayal justify murder? And who is ultimately responsible when systems of exploitation create conditions where tragedy becomes inevitable? These questions demand our attention if we're serious about preventing future deaths like Jasmine's. Don't let her death be forgotten. Don't let the systems that enabled her exploitation continue unchallenged. Your engagement with stories like this is the first step toward demanding the accountability that might save the next Jasmine Cruz, the next young woman who travels far from home seeking opportunity and finds only exploitation and death. The baby who died with Jasmine would have been a girl, according to the autopsy report. She was never given a name.